The purpose of the Housing Solutions for Our Loved One panel is to inspire other NAMI chapters throughout the state of California who are concerned about the lack of supportive housing options for their families, to learn about how they can engage, advocate, and help support more housing through the pipeline. California has a housing crisis that creates significant challenges to our state residents. The crisis is magnified for people suffering from mental illness. Parents and guardians struggle in their efforts to find a place that will both house their loved ones and provide oversight and supportive care so the family member can live with a sense of independence and dignity. Many of these parents are aging and they're taking care of their mentally ill loved ones. They have a great concern about what will happen to them without them being there to support them. Where will they go? How will they live? Will they become homeless? And it is in the spirit of that we came together with this panel to talk with experts. I will be introducing these experts as right now. Senator Scott Wiener is kind enough to join us. We are honored to have him here in our panel discussion. You'll hear from him. He has been a fierce housing advocate around the need to create more housing for all residents in California. Senator Wiener also understands those living with mental illness are gravely underserved within our community. He will speak about the overall housing conditions in the state of California, and I've encouraged him to share his thoughts about how NAMI members can be stronger advocates around housing for their loved ones. Next, we have Ian Adamson, founder of Mateo Lodge, Inc., founded in 1975. Ian is, I will just say, a personal hero of mine. He is known in the Redwood City and San Mateo County area as a leader and a champion for people suffering from mental illness. He does case management. He has developed housing for people with mental illness, a mobile unit that goes out in a crisis situation. He understands this community like no other, and he is here to share his inspirational story about how he started Mateo Lodge back in the late 70s and where that's at today. Our third panelist will be Melinda Henning. She is a NAMI parent, a NAMI member, and she has started Solutions for Supportive Homes, and it's an organization of the parents that I recognized earlier. These are parents that come together worried about where their loved ones, their family members will go if something happens to them, if they pass away, if they get ill. They're currently housing their loved one or managing their care. And within the spirit of that crisis, they're trying to understand solutions to help get more housing in the pipeline for this severely underrepresented community group, those suffering from mental illness. So with the spirit of that, I'll just hand it over to Senator Wiener to share his thoughts about this subject. Thank you, Senator.
Great, thank you, Kelly, and thank you to everyone from NAMI for everything that you do. I have been an admirer of NAMI for many years, back to my time in local government, in terms of just advocating for greater access for all sorts of support, including treatment for people struggling with mental health and addiction issues. And we know that because of the lack of an appropriate safety net in this country and in California, that it falls to the families and loved ones to be there for their family members who are in crisis. And we need to do more as a society, not to just dump it all on the families, to deal with it with very, very little support. And so thank you for your continued advocacy. And we've been trying to expand access to mental health treatment in recent years, including legislation that I authored and the governor to sign, SB 855, that will require insurance companies to cover a dramatically broader range of mental health and addiction treatments early and not waiting until someone is in crisis. So let's keep up that fight. In terms of housing, we have to looking at the big picture here. You know, it used to be in California that it was never cheap here, but people who struggled, who didn't have a lot of income, could find housing. Even in a place like San Francisco, there was housing that was available for people who were very low income, who maybe had a social security check. It might be an SRO or residential hotel, but there was somewhere for people to live. And that has changed in recent years. And I'm not saying it was easy, but it existed. That has changed in recent years. And now you look at an SRO in San Francisco, and at least before the pandemic, I don't know what's happening now, but before the pandemic, SROs, the places where if you had a disability check, you could rent a room, were renting for $1,500 a month or more. And so you were having more like retail workers or others who were living there because they can't afford a traditional apartment, and that pushes people at the bottom of the income spectrum onto the streets. And so, you know, I'll get to what we can specifically do to support people with mental health challenges who need housing, but we have to always keep in mind that we're never going to solve this problem until we solve the deep structural barriers to any kind of housing in California, because we used to do it in California the old-fashioned way. We would, as we grew as a state, we would build enough housing for our growing population. And so back in the early 1960s, when we were a state of 15 million people, we were building 250 to 330,000 units of housing a year. Fast forward to now, a state of 40 million people, and we've been building 80 to 100,000 units a year. So we almost tripled our population in 60 years, but our housing production went down by 2/3. And so is it any wonder that we're in such a deep crisis and that we have somewhere between a 2.5 and 3.5 million home shortage? When you have a shortage that is that profound, it just pushes everyone down. It makes it harder for the middle class and impossible for low income people. And that's why so many people have become housing insecure. It's why so many people have to live 2 hours from where they work with all the environmental problems that causes. And it's why so many people who are living in their cars or living on the streets. And so we have to get it together. And we have been working in the legislature to just acknowledge that our system of housing in California is deeply broken, that we have prioritized people's desire to have no change in their community. We prioritized people's desire for the look and feel of their community. We prioritize that physicality, how my neighborhood looks and feels, over human beings. And we have to stop prioritizing the look and feel of a neighborhood over the needs of actual human beings. And we have to get back to a human being-centered approach to housing, which is that, of course, we all love our neighborhoods. I love my neighborhood too. But a neighborhood is not just about how it looks. It's about the people who are there and who can afford to live there. And if people can't afford to live in that neighborhood, and you lose income diversity and racial diversity and age diversity because young people have no future there, that is extremely damaging to any community. So we've been working to try to just fix our approach to housing and to say we need to build a lot more housing. It needs to be easier and faster. We need to legalize housing through zoning and allow for more multi-unit construction and so forth. And we have to always keep in mind that restrictive zoning, where we only allow single-family homes, which is about 80%, 70–80% of California, that is effectively a ban on affordable housing for low-income people or supportive housing, because you have to have multi-unit zoning to have that kind of housing. So we've made some real strides in recent years, whether it is allowing for more density in certain areas, expediting the approval process. really ramping up ADU or accessory dwelling units, in-law units, granny flats, which frankly can be a good option for someone who has a family member that is struggling, whether it's with mental health issues or an elderly family member or a kid who needs housing, to be able to create an in-law unit or a rear yard cottage for someone to live where they're living in their own unit, but they're still close to you. So we've been doing a lot of different kinds of work to make sure that local communities are accountable for approving and building enough housing. But we also need to acknowledge that as important as it is to build every kind of housing, that for our low-income residents, and particularly for people who are suffering from mental health challenges, people with other forms of disability, need extra support. And so we need to be investing in housing subsidies or subsidized housing, which can take different forms. By building subsidized housing that's going to be affordable to our lowest income residents, or simple housing subsidies like Section 8, where we give people vouchers so they can help them afford the rent. And for people who have the most severe challenges, they need supportive housing. And that is housing with wraparound services right there. And we've typically focused our supportive housing program on formerly homeless people, helping people off the streets into supportive housing. But we have to recognize that there are a lot of people who are not homeless, but they need supportive housing. And what we don't want is to say to people, well, in order for you to qualify for supportive housing, you have to become homeless first. That's not a good solution. And once someone becomes homeless, that as you know, that amplifies every problem that they have, and it makes it harder to get them stabilized and into the housing and the support that we need. So we have been doing a few things to try to make it easier to build affordable housing for our lowest income residents, including streamlining to make it faster to get it approved, and to deal with sometimes the knee-jerk opposition we see to this type of housing in communities. People have a lot of stereotypes about what that housing means, and that it's going to cause crime or other problems in their community, which is not true. But it ends up, you can have these projects can be tied up for years and years or killed altogether. So we've passed some laws in recent years to really expedite and facilitate that process to make sure these projects get approved, and we've made a lot of strides there. But we also have to make sure that we're investing the money, because this type of housing requires public subsidies. And the federal government used to be invested in a big way in what we used to call public housing, that we now call affordable housing or social housing or whatever we want to call it. And the federal government, starting with the Reagan administration, started just withdrawing from housing investments. And it's really just paltry what the federal government puts in now. There's a federal tax credit program for low-income housing, but not much more. And my hope is that if we're able to have a change in administration, that we can really get the federal government back in the business of truly robust investment in housing for our lowest income residents. In California, the state has not done enough, and we have started to invest a lot more of state dollars in housing for our lowest income residents. And then in some cities, like places like San Francisco, we've been able to ramp that up. But in many cities, they either don't have the resources or don't have the political will. And then as we ramp up the investment that we need in housing for low-income people, we do need to do more, as I mentioned, for people who are living with various kinds of disabilities, including mental health challenges, to make clear that supportive housing is not only for people who are coming in off the streets, it's also for people who have never been on the streets, thankfully, but they still are at risk of becoming homeless and they have unstable housing. And so that is a big challenge. And what I would say to NAMI is I would encourage you, first of all, to advocate both locally and at the state level for pro-housing policies in general, because even just general pro-housing policy saying we want to build housing faster, we want to allow for more of it through zoning reform, we want to, you know, that is always going to be beneficial for every kind of housing, and that is sort of the foundation. But then on top of it, advocating both at the federal, state, and local level for investments, public investments in affordable housing, and then having those conversations about housing where people who are not homeless but are in need of support are eligible for those homes. So there's a lot of work to do, and I look forward to working with you on these issues, and my door is always open. And again, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Kelly, you're muted.
Hi, thank you, Senator Wiener. I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this session and we will be sending it out, the link to the attendees. NAMI will make that available. There'll be more information to come. I also want to let you know that the last 15 minutes of this will allow for your questions. Continue to put them in the chat box and we will monitor them and ask our panelists at the conclusion of Melinda's remarks. Ian, take it away.
Okay. I want to tell you a story about Mateo Lodge, which is our nonprofit here in San Mateo County that was started by members of NAMI. Some of you may remember people like Tony Hoffman and Fran Hoffman. They were the folks that really, with a group of other folks, got together in a time when there was nothing really in San Mateo. And San Mateo now has a lot of good programs. And I think that's a lot to do with the efforts of NAMI. Going back to 1975, when they founded Mateo Lodge as a non-profit corporation, this small group of parents, the only person in that group I think that had any, what we would say, relevant experience was Tony Hoffman, who was actually a union organizer. So he knew how to organize. But looking at the landscape back then in 1975, there was only one program that was run by a non-profit that lasted 3 weeks. And that was it, as far as I can remember. And so this small group of very committed parents got together and they actually founded Mateo Lodge. I didn't. People you know, attribute that to me, which I'm very grateful for, but it's actually not true. So in 1975, this small group of parents that were very dedicated, and we'll talk about the kind of dedication that they had to make things happen and change the world. And that's the kind of dedication those folks had. And so they started Mateo Lodge in 1975. I came on board in 1978. As you can hear from my accent, I'm from England, but my background over there was in psychiatric nursing, rehab work, and also in music, which I think with the training in my nursing and with my music background really made it quite a unique kind of group of skill set for working with folks that are mentally ill and drug addiction issues. So this small group of parents were probably like a lot of the folks listening to this presentation, and they're wondering, how can we get more housing? And this is how Mateo Lodge did it. Number one, the group of parents, there's probably about a half a dozen, maybe 8 of them, that's all. But they were incredibly dedicated, incredibly brave, and under the leadership, I would say, of Tony Hoffman and his wife, Fran, they managed to achieve a non-profit to begin and get funding. And how did that happen? So one of the things that characterized that group of parents was a lack of fear and an ultra determination. I mean, 2 of them, for example, and I can give you names for all these folks. I won't do it in the presentation, but I'm a very careful historian. But 2 of the parents, for example, went into Leo Ryan, the congressman's office, and just marched right past his secretary, barged into his office and pounded on his desk saying, "Mr. Ryan, you have to do something for the mentally ill." Now, I don't suggest you'll do that to Scott Wiener's office right now because he's already on board. But, you know, that level of fearlessness and righteousness and indignation in a good way. And I want to stress that all these folks knew that how to get people's attention, but they weren't obnoxious, they weren't rude, they were just dedicated, and anybody that came into contact with this group knew that their heart was in the right place because they just wanted to help their children. And that's very important. If you come across, if you're advocating as somebody who's just angry and just mad at the world because you have a difficult situation in your own life, then things aren't going to go as well for you, I think. So this small group of family members pooled their resources. They rented a property that was also bought by somebody that was sympathetic. They had no funding yet, but they bought the property. So it was a commitment of resources and money and dedication to a common goal to provide housing. And they started by just the original Mateo house, which was 6 beds, and they started that and they proved, and we in business, we call that a loss leader. So they started this thing with next to no money. They got a small grant from the Cowell Foundation in San Francisco, all private money, and they just started to demonstrate that this program could be a benefit to the community. And you need to do that if you're going to be attracting the attention of serious funders. Is you need to demonstrate that your program or your housing program is going to be a benefit to the community. So in Mateo Lodge's case, they started this program and they ran it for a year or more with next to no money, and they began talking to the county. Now, this wasn't an easy process. Tony Hoffman and his wife, Fran, and another thing to point out about them was that they were completely united as a couple, as a married couple, to this goal. And I really believe that that's a powerful thing too. When a man and a woman or a couple, a committed couple, are seeking and going after a goal, because if Tony couldn't do something, Fran was there. And if Fran couldn't do it, Tony was there. And everybody knew that. And one of the stories I love is in early times when Fran and Tony were going to the mental health advisory boards to advocate for housing for the mentally ill, they were asked to leave and they were escorted out by security. So we've come a long way in San Mateo. They started this little program, demonstrated it could be a benefit to the community. And then in 1978, they got their first county contract, small contract, and then we grew from that. I hired on in 1978 as a counsellor, and some of the folks listening to the presentation are ex-staff members and present staff members of Mateo Lodge. And I hired in 1978, and then and we demonstrated to the county that we could save them a whole lot of money by putting people from the lock facilities. And in those days, the institutionalization was in full swing. And we actually took people from Napa. And you can imagine how much money the county is spending on a state hospital bed to come to a 6-bed home and to receive good care and save the county an enormous amount of money. So they liked what we were doing. They gave us a contract. And since then, we built on that. So fast forwarding to today, we have 3 major sites where we do 24-hour care. Cassia, Wally's, Humboldt. We have case management services. We have 2 outreach teams, one called the support team, where it goes out to families which are having difficulties. And we've always made a point at Mateo Lodge to be focusing on the sickest people, and particularly the people that have no insight into their illness. The people that think everybody else is off except them. They think they're right on, but everybody else is off. And so people that don't have insight into their mental illnesses, those are the folks that we really focused on. So our organization has grown from very small beginnings to just a group of parents to where we now hire over 40 staff and are running all these programs in the county of San Mateo. And the great and the wonderful, one of the great and wonderful things about doing an endeavor like this is that if you're involved in starting a housing program, then you get to see it work 365 days a year, every year. And you can say and be very satisfied and thankful that you've been a part of something that makes a difference to somebody's life who's mentally ill 365 days a year. That's pretty special. And I don't know too many jobs that can be that satisfying. So other things that characterize Mateo Lodge is family commitment. We always had board members that were family members. We demonstrated that it can be done. An attitude of compassionate love and determination that wasn't going to be fobbed off, and continually keeping an eye on the political directions and what needs to be made aware of as you run programs in a county situation. So we started, I like to say, small and beautiful, like the book. There's a book that said, you know, small and beautiful. With a love of community, we believe, and I do particularly, is that when we're going into a community to start a housing program, we want to be part of that community. We don't want to disrupt it. So when we started Cassia House, which is one of our 14 beds programs in Redwood City, the very next piece of property was a crack house. We're talking, you know, the 80s, late 80s. And people, as you know, are very reluctant to allow the mentally ill people to come into their programs, into their communities. So what I've always believed is we go in small and we're going to be a blessing to the community. So one of the things we did was to clean up that crack house next to us. And so the street became a normal street. And, you know, you make your choice. Do you want to live with the mentally ill? Do you want to live with people using crack and out of control on drugs all the time? We'll invite a non-profit like Mateo Lodge into your community, and we will help you revolutionize your community so it can be a beautiful community. So, and the other thing that we practiced was I've always tried to hire people that work for Mateo Lodge that are already doing the work. In other words, there are family members out there, and there are people that have had personal experience that are doing the work, that are working with the mentally ill, they're advocating, they're doing all of that right now. So why don't you give them a job and they'll continue doing that and then get paid to do it? So the other thing that we've practiced as an organization is we treat our staff fairly. We always provide 100% medical care and flexibility, because it's one thing to say you're family orientated, you're NAMI members, you're concerned about family members, and they expect your staff to work a schedule or a job where the family suffers. So we've been very aware and cognizant of the fact that we want to listen to our staff. What are your family needs? Let's make sure you take care of your family. If you're going to work here, let's get your flexible schedule so you can work and take care of your family. So full healthcare, flexible schedules. One of the things we've always practiced too, we have very little office space. We live in the cupboard under the stairs like Harry Potter. We don't pay money. We've never paid money for office space. The other thing we practice is we don't have meaningless meetings continuously. And I find that when you put those things together, healthcare, flexibility, no ridiculous meetings, and which are more often about the needs of your administrator than they are about the needs of the mentally ill, you're able to retain your staff. So we have no turnover at Mateo Lodge virtually. And people like there's Armando Sandoval is on the call right now, you know, he's a bar police officer now, doing great work with them, with the mentally ill. But he worked for us for 25 years. So most of our staff have been with us for years and years and years and years. And this in turn brings stability to the mentally ill, because their life is often broken. And the last thing I'll say is that we want to bring permanent solutions with permanent housing. We don't want our mentally ill to have to keep jumping from program to program. So with that, I'll stop. So that's the Mateo Lodge story. A group of parents dedicated with a dream, with a vision, with determination, with love, that battered down all the different barriers against it. And now we have, you know, we have programs all over the county, and we're blessing families that in the beginning blessed us. So that's our story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. And in terms of staff retainment, that is an outstanding statistic. And I will say, my brother has a mental illness. He has schizophrenia, and he was lucky enough to come in contact with NAMI San Mateo back in the 80s. That really helped my mother and my father get through the crisis as it originated. And we came in contact with Ian, and circling back from different housing options with my brother's life, he circled back into Mateo Lodge, and the people there welcomed my brother back after years and years and remembered him. And I know that gave him a sense of just a real sense of community and a sense of ease in his mind in entering back into that space. So I saw it in real time, and what an actual balm it was to my BALM, to my brother's sensibilities when he entered back in, to see those familiar faces. So now I'm going to introduce Melinda Henning to share the organization, the Grassroots organization that is in the spirit of what Ian mentioned, advocates coming from a place of goodness and passion for their loved ones. Melinda, take it away.
Melinda, you're on mute.
How's that? I just want to say I'm so inspired by every time I hear Ian speak, and I hope that our group, Solutions for Supportive Homes, can absorb some of that energy of the grassroots group of parents that started Mateo Lodge. That is our great success story, and we want more of it, and we want more people like Ian around too. Our group, Solutions for Supportive Homes, is a group of parents who are working to increase the supply and the quality of permanent, supportive, affordable homes in the community, where people, our kids, our adult kids, and many others can live with dignity in their home communities and get the support that they need to carry on with their lives. And we're a classic example of another grassroots organization that popped up from the energy of people understanding the problem because it's personal. And we all are, like Kelly said, not all of us, but many of us are in our 70s, our 60s, our 70s, our 80s, and we're all united around this one question of what is going to happen for our adult children living with disabling mental illnesses when we're gone. Where will they live? Who will help them when we're gone? And so the seed for this initiative was planted, certainly not by me, but by another woman who had the idea that she could stage a series of public forums involving everyone to stir up some interest and get people talking about the problems and the solutions. And from that group emerged a small core working group of parents who have been meeting weekly in each other's homes and on Zoom now. And we realized right from the beginning that we understood the problem awfully well. We needed to figure out specific solutions. And so we started researching what models of supportive homes in communities are successful. And we found a lot all over the country. All kinds of different models of successful supportive homes are popping up, and these models can be replicated. And we know that one size does not fit all, and so we need to look at different successful models. We have looked at shared cooperative houses, small settings. We've looked at motel conversions. We've looked at purpose-built small apartment complexes with on-site services. Some in our group are really interested in equity share opportunities where parents get together and invest privately in property and then contract for the services. And we've discovered community land trusts as a potential financing vehicle. And so we're profiling these solutions on our new website, which is solutionsforsupportivehomes.org. So I want to encourage everybody to go there and see some of these models that could be replicated. And while you're there, will you please give us your email so that we can be in touch? And we'd like to have a few words about what are other parents and families and community professionals working on? What are their specific concerns? And how can we get together to leverage the power of numbers? Because we know that when we show up in bigger numbers and we make our voices louder and more consistent, just like Tony Hoffman, that's when we can start getting things done. So we're really eager to increase our capacity and to see that we're not all working in silos to solve this problem that's been existing for so long. I don't know if it's worthwhile to share a little bit of my own personal story.
Yes, I think so.
Because we do come to this work because it's personal. And you don't find out about these issues until they hit your family. In my case, 26 years ago, it's been a long journey, when my beautiful and talented son has experienced a psychotic break. He's now 50. I was surprised, but I was not confused, because I had a previous career running a therapeutic school inside a very good private psychiatric hospital in Walnut Creek, where we had multiple non-medical therapies and people working these therapies, getting better, very ill people getting better and better from so much human interaction, really, because in those days we didn't really have a whole lot to offer in terms of medications. So I knew what good psychiatric care looked like and what the support would look like. And I went looking for it, and I found it simply was not available, except at a price tag of about $300,000 a year. And so what we did find was, my son and I, that the acute hospital psychiatric care here in San Mateo County is really quite good, and we're grateful for that. But often what happens after hospitalization isn't so good. And over the years, for my son, every time he's had a relapse and perhaps had to go back to the hospital for adjustment of medications or whatever, discharge planners are often completely stumped about where he can go next to get the level of care that he will need to carry on. And so it's been like starting from scratch over and over. He'd lose whatever housing support he had, he'd go to a different service provider, and the instability was really part of the problem. And so that is why I'm motivated to look at this gap in the continuum of mental health care that we all envision in San Mateo County and beyond, which is the gap in subacute care facilities, and especially in permanent, supportive, affordable, truly health supporting permanent places where people can advance their recovery and live with dignity in the community.
Any other final thoughts about your group and what your next steps are since you just started this Grassroots? I know that you did a lot of due diligence and background information, inviting people in. Again, if you could just do a couple quick steps. This should be an educational forum for other NAMI chapters throughout the state of California to take the ideas that you have, that Ian has, and replicate that within their communities. What are the first steps that you took for this?
Well, our next step is we're actually primed for action, but we need more numbers, and we know that other parents are working on these same issues. Connecting them together is our next step so that we can have the power of numbers and we can leverage each other's research and knowledge. There is a lot out there. I know that some of them are listening right now. And we just hope that you will go to solutionsforsupportivehomes.org and let us know who you are. The potential for creating a regional convening, for example, right now, is good. One thing we know, Kelly, you introduced me by saying that I started this group. Not true. All I really did was offer my dining room table for people to meet. It's always a group, and we're powerful, and we're motivated by love, and we have a lot of data and knowledge about what to do. There are solutions. We just need to get together and fund them and make them happen.
Thank you. And I wanted to just ask another question. One of the things that Melinda and I talked about when we were coming together with this panel was, how can NAMI California play a role in harnessing the ideas that people are doing up and down the state. We come together for educational programs, but it is the Solutions for Supportive Housing. It is Mateo Lodge. It is these different organizations that are operating in communities that maybe we don't know about. And if we could, NAMI California could be a hub for collecting those stories, collecting the leaders within those communities to learn from one another. And then the second part of that is the advocating, which was mentioned by Senator Wiener. So I'm going to open it up now. Some of you have put your questions in the chat box. Some of them are comments. I'm going to be pivoting to the questions, but I'd like to start with asking each of you, and I'll start with Senator Wiener, the importance of advocacy. You've got thousands of parents here, family members that can be harnessed for housing advocacy and as it relates to the mental illness. What are the roadmaps that you can offer quickly to this group so that we can get our act together and start advocating for more housing options?
Yeah, I mean, being super organized at the grassroots level, whether it's at a city council level for approval of specific projects, or at the state level for broader policy, when elected officials hear from groups of people in their community, they listen. And so having that network where you know that, you know, in this assembly district or in this city, you have, you know, 100, you know, active NAMI members who will show up, whether show up at a town hall or call in, like that really has an impact if people are hearing from folks in the community they represent. And so having that just level of consistent organization where you can easily, quickly activate people really matters a lot.
Thank you. Ian, do you want to talk a little bit and make a comment about advocacy of NAMI families?
Because the voice of Tony Hoffman comes to me quite often. And Tony was very clear about NAMI being an advocacy group. And that meant to him that they have to, it's like telling truth to power all the time. And sometimes it's not an easy role. But I think in recent years, what's happened is some of the advocacy groups, NAMI and others, have become way too friendly with the system. I'd like to see NAMI just be real clear about their role of with force advocating, and the politicians will listen. The history of Mateo Lodge, very important part of that was the relationship that the Hoffmans developed with Anna Eshu. And Anna's just been, you know, personally for me, she's been an inspirational politician because she's always been helpful. And she was a big part, that relationship that they managed to connect with her. And of course, all the families, like Melinda, just told her personal story. These stories are so powerful. And if you can get one-on-one with significant influential people and tell your stories, and then add to that a whole helpful force of belief and faith that you're going to make a change and it's going to happen. You know, it's a silly story from my past, from my musical past. My band toured with Van Halen. Some of you know who they are. Van Halen, when they were nothing and they were nobody, would go to the LA Coliseum in the parking lot, and they would say to each other, one day we're going to play in here. And they ended up being one of the biggest rock bands. Don't like their music that much, except for Eddie Van Halen, great guitar player. But, you know, they had that kind of belief. That's what the families need. And you can generate either one person who's on fire, and then that person gets a group of other people on fire around him, and you don't quit, and you know you're going to succeed. That's what we need.
Yes, and to that point, in other conversations I've had with NAMI members, the sense of fatigue. Obviously, the parents are dealing with a tremendous amount of stress that is unknown, and that's a story we have to tell as well. But I think
like a wife in your life who really encourages you, and it's in fact my wife that actually, when I was thinking of quitting mental health to get a real job, because back in the early days of Mateo Lodge, they couldn't pay any money. So you had to work for free pretty much. But she was the one that convinced me to stay with it because she felt like it was such a worthy project. So yeah, you know, get positive people around you. You don't have to marry them necessarily, but get positive people around you, and just agree that you're not going to quit until you get what you want, what you need, what the community needs. And the last thing I want to say about that, Kelly, is that it has to be a bigger goal, I feel, than just what your family needs. Because politicians can't come in and do you a special favor, but they can come in and do things for the mentally ill. And when we do that, then your child eventually gets the benefit of that as well, as your family member did, Kelly. And we're really glad to have him. He's a lovely man.
Thank you. Melinda, did you want to say anything about advocacy within your group and where you're moving on the advocacy front?
Well, we've had numerous meetings with our local elected officials. We're starting to meet with some state officials. Good. Scott Wiener, we are so grateful for you. Did you hear that? Thank you so much for your work, and I cannot wait to meet you personally. We want to be on your team.
Great.
And we have become friendly with the system. We want to partner with the resources that exist, and we have found many people within the public mental health care and housing organizations here in San Mateo County who really want to help, but many times policy holds them back, and just the scale of the problem is kind of daunting. And so we just have to keep at that. But I do feel like we have to understand how everything works, and contribute every way we can and get everyone on the same page about what's really important. And that is about the choice we make as a society about whether or not we're really going to take care of all the people who are in need.
We have a question here from Mr. Kevin Carroll of the Hotel Council of San Francisco. He wants to know, how can NAMI chapters mobilize together for a larger advocacy voice? Ian, you want to take that?
Well, I don't know I'm the right person to take that, but what I would say is, yeah, become terrifying. Get power together. Get the hotels together. You know, the thing about mental health, and I've been, in my career, I've been everywhere from the White House to the streets. It affects everybody. It affects everybody. And I don't want you to think the current White House, because we don't want to go there. We've got enough problems with that. But, build a terrifying coalition of loving people. The more the merrier, yeah. And my point about advocacy is, once you work with the system. There are good people in the system. You find out who they are, you work with them. Then you start working and achieving things together. That's great. But when you've achieved your goal, what your first goal is, don't stop advocating. Your goal in NAMI is to keep advocating, because people like me, I have a vested interest. I get a salary. The politicians, shouldn't listen to me as much as they listen to the parents, the constituents. That's your job. Keep advocating. You win one, go, how do we win the next one?
Right. So now I'm going to go to a question on the housing in general, and I'll start with Senator Wiener. The COVID crisis is obviously going to allow for a transformational real estate community within our cities and within the state and across the U.S. With vacancies we're seeing here in San Francisco right away. People are moving out to what they consider safer climates, and empty buildings will be, opening up. Is there any kind of forethought about how to access some of the buildings that may not come online for a few years, or repurposing some of these buildings to become housing units?
Well, one thing I'll say is we should be very cautious about the many predictions that are out there about what COVID is going to do in the long run. Like, we've seen predictions that offices are going to be a thing of the past, and everyone's going to permanently work from home, which I think is untrue. I don't think there's a basis to say that. So I want to be careful about making these predictions. Everyone has like a hot take about what's going to be permanent coming out of COVID. Just remember that this is not our first pandemic. 100 years ago, we went through the Spanish flu, which was much more severe than COVID in terms of, if you adjust it for population, it was like, we're talking 2.2 million Americans adjusted for population would have died from Spanish flu, compared to we're at 215,000 now, which is horrible, much, much higher than it needed to be because of this administration. But we had this horrible pandemic 100 years ago, and then it ended and life returned to normal. And so, but putting that aside, we do have, even pre-COVID, there was a lot of commercial space, strip malls, other areas that were really underperforming that frankly should be redeveloped as either housing or mixed use. And there were a couple of bills in the legislature this year to facilitate that conversion. They did not pass, but I think we'll see it again next year because it's an idea that a lot of people agree on. So I do think that we're going to see movement in that direction for underperforming commercial office space that should be converted.
And Senator Wiener, could you share with us what you think the legislature's understanding is of mental health? I struggle with us being in bed with, the addiction population, which obviously needs care as well. It's not to compare one to the other, but there is a sensibility about mental health. Many of us on this call right now have loved ones that are truly suffering from schizophrenia, severe mental health disorders that don't go away, with perhaps a happy outcome with addiction treatment. So I wonder, could you just share with us what you think the sentiment is inside the legislature for this population of sometimes unnoticed, unsupported, unrecognized people within our community that are walking around in quiet suffering?
Yeah, I think very strong, and I think the awareness in the legislature is quite high, and it's bipartisan. And so I mentioned the legislation that we did this year, SB 855, to require insurance companies to cover much earlier and broader treatment for both mental health and addiction care. And that had huge, well-funded opposition from the health insurance industry and from some of the Chamber of Commerce. And it just flew through. It was much easier than I thought it was going to be to make the case to, very, very moderate Democrats and some Republicans. And it really had people just got it. You didn't have to explain that much. And people also know that COVID is making things worse. But people, I think there's a pretty broad awareness in the legislature, and there's good mental health advocacy happening at the state level too, that is raising awareness even more. So I think that you'll find fertile ground for your ideas.
Thank you. We have a comment here. I'm a case worker in Orange County, and a single parents with small children are expected to be on the street before they qualify for housing resource support. And Section 8 housing has a 5-year wait list. Churches and private organizations are the only places I have found support, since tax dollars don't seem to ever arrive into the hands of homeless families. Can government funding be provided to private organizations? Senator Wiener?
Yes, absolutely. In most of our affordable housing providers are not government. It's often nonprofits. Sometimes it's for-profit, but it's usually nonprofits. And so yes, and there are religious institutions as well that receive government funding to provide housing and other support for formerly homeless people and for others in need of housing. And in fact, this year I had legislation, it was Senate Bill 899, to allow churches and other religious institutions and some other nonprofits to build affordable housing on their land. We have a lot of churches in particular with a lot of excess land. It's a huge amount of land. and they want to build housing for low-income people of all different varieties. But local impediments make it impossible. So this bill would have authorized them to build that housing. It didn't move forward this year because of some challenges, some disputes with the building trades, but I think we'll resolve that and hopefully pass that bill next year.
Great. And then I'd like to pivot a question to both you and Ian on conservatorship. Where is the sentiment for conservatorship, and where is that legislation at right now, and how it might help our community?
Yeah, so I saw that in the chat box, and also there was a comment that I passed conservator and created a new conservatorship. It was last year and the year before for people who were severely debilitated, and particularly the existing conservatorship laws do not really help people with addiction. If you are, it's really, the laws are messed up. And so we created this new conservatorship. There was a question in the chat box about that to be eligible for it, you have to have been 5158 times in a 12-month period, and that's a lot. And I agree, I would have liked for it to be lower. You have to understand that conservatorships are an incredibly contentious issue because of civil liberties concerns, and we had a lot of opposition from groups, ACLU, some disability rights advocates, people who are concerned that this will just be used as a way of warehousing people with disabilities, and of course it has to be done in an appropriate way, so you're not doing that. But we were, forced to make some compromises, and that's where the 85150s came from, even though I would have liked to see it lower. But I will say, in terms of the politics and the members of the legislature, it's not controversial. That bill, every time it came up for a vote in the Assembly or the Senate, it got a 90% vote, very bipartisan. And so, but in terms of the advocacy world, it's very controversial.
Ian, do you have any comments?
Well, there's so much I want to say. If I could just come back to COVID for a minute, just to point out to everybody that's listening, the heroism, the quiet heroism that's happening in all the residential programs around the state. My program, but also programs that Melissa Platt, who's on the call, Mental Health Association, the shelters, the halfway houses, the social rehabs. The staff are coming to work every day, and thank God we've had no COVID. We thank God for that. But that's quiet heroism. That's the one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is just, I want to say to Mr. Wiener that I totally support his efforts on the conservatorship and the other efforts to, because I think one of the things we come across, and the parents see it all the time, folks that are seriously mentally ill, they can't make decisions to help themselves often. As soon as they're well enough, yeah, they can make good decisions. But so many times we see, and I live in Santa Cruz, and it's a lovely city, but the homeless situation down there is off the map. It's just off the map. And I think part of that is we're not really grabbing the nettle. And I understand the ACLU and all the rights advocacy, but I think from our point of view, if we where we're coming from is a position of love, wanting to take care of people, and want these conservatorships to take care of people, not to see them dying on the street and with no shoes and nothing to eat. And we see it every day in Santa Cruz. It's very, very sad.
Well, I want to end this right now. The panel, we're got 2 minutes, and I know that there's other panels going on. I want to thank NAMI California for allowing us to host this panel on housing. I want to thank our esteemed panelists, Senator Scott Wiener, Ian Adamson, and Melinda Henning for participating and sharing your story. And I think the message of the day is advocate, advocate, advocate. Let's start harnessing our power, harnessing our voice, and hope that NAMI California can allow us to have a portal to come together, share our stories, and fight for more housing for our loved ones. Thank you so much for participating.